Kiddushin Daf, the test is primarily focused on the opinion we saw quoted on the last daf of Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda, who explains that Yi'ud, which is when a master marries the Amma Evriya, the Kesef Kiddushin is the fact that he is moichel, he forgoes the rest of the years of service that she owes him. The Gemara is going to have a number of halachos which we can learn from that, or questions we can resolve based on that, and explanations of brisos that use that. We'll be focused on that. So we begin with the shaila that was asked by Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish said the mitzvah of Yid, that the master again marries the Amma Evriya, is not only that the master himself marries, but also he can marry her off to his son. So the Gemara wants to know, this son, could he be a katan? Generally, you can only have a legally binding marriage between a gadol and a gedayla, unless the father gets involved. So can a katan do Yid? And we're going to see that the katan and the katana, generally, like we said, although they can't marry, Yid might be an exception to all those rules. Yibum would be another potential exception. We'll see that. So the Gemara says, can a katan do Yid or not? What's the two sides of the question? So on the one hand, the Torah says, Im le b'noi yidena, so it says b'noi, that would seem to imply any type of son, or even if he's a child. Or on the other hand, maybe B'nai is similar to the Adon himself, and just like the Adon is an adult, the Ben also has to be an adult. So Reb Zera says, let's bring a proof. Rabbi said that says a discussion of the Isser of adultery, that is Niyuf. So it says, the Ish Asher Yinaf as Ashes Ish Asher Yinaf. So it talks about the Noyef and the husband of the woman. That is the violator and the husband. And it calls them both an ish. So this is to exclude that they both have to be adults. Neither of them can be a child. If the husband of the woman who does niyaf is a katan, there is no chiv misa on the nayif. So the Gemara says, what are we talking about over here? Obviously, the reason that it's excluded is because there is no real marriage to a katan. And that's why it's excluded, and therefore it's a proof that you can't have a katan make a marriage under any circumstances, even through Yid. So Gemara says, no, this is a raya, the opposite. It has to be that there is a legally binding marriage to a katan somehow, otherwise why would the pasuk need to exclude it? If it's just because it doesn't exist, you don't need a pasuk to say that. So this proves the opposite. This proves that there is a legally binding marriage to a katan, and what must that be? That must be Yid. So Gemara says not necessarily. You're right in structure, but not necessarily. It could be Yibum. And the halacha is, Gemara brings, that Rav Ashi says that a yavam from 9 years and 1 day old and up can do Yibum and Midarais, and that's because she is a Zika to him. There's already a connection between the two. It can be completed with a Yibum marriage that's done by a katan. Now, therefore, the pasuk comes to tell me that that would be a full legally binding marriage with Daraisa, but since he's a katan, if somebody commits adultery with his wife, there is no misa on him in that circumstance. Now, also it's important to note that it has to be from age 9 and not because the bia has to count as a real bia. Yibum we know is performed through a bia only, and the bia of a child under the age of 9, of a boy under the age of 9, doesn't count. All right, so what are we going to do from our shaila about a katan doing yid or not? So the Gemara quotes another proof from Rav Evoy and Rav Yanai. Quotes a brisa that says clearly, "Ein yid el begadol." There is no such thing as yid of a katan. It has to be an adult. Now it also says ein yid el midas. You also have to have the das. You have to have knowledge, understand what you're doing. So the Gemara says, why do we need both of those halachos? If you obviously, the reason you have to be a gadol is because you have to have the das. You have to have understanding as to what this is about. That's the same halacha. So the Gemara says two explanations. First one is, this is really the same halacha. It's meant to be read as one. There's no yid for a katan because you have to have the das. Second explanation is that when we have to say you have to have the das, we're not talking about the man who's a katan in this circumstance having das. We're talking about the woman having das. The Amevriya has to have das, meaning she has to be informed as to the fact that this is happening. Generally, Kiddushin of a katana can occur if her father is makabel Kiddushin for her, and she doesn't have to know about it because she doesn't have a say in it anyway. But here she has to have a say in it. And Abaye, Braid Rabbi Avo, is going to explain that this is an exception to the rule that a katana cannot do a marriage. Here she can make her own marriage. And this is going to bring us into the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and two explanations as to what he actually holds. So Abai read the Rabbi Avo quotes a Brisa who says when the pasuk says Ashalo Yada, he's not doing Yud. We're going to make a little drush here, and Yud, instead of meaning marriage, Yud here is going to mean knowledge, like from the word Tzeda'as. He has to liya'ada, to inform her. He has to let the Amariya know that he's doing Yid. Otherwise, she can't have the das to agree, and she has to agree. Now, Abai explains it that it works as follows. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, who hold what is the kesef kiddushin. When the master does Yid, he doesn't give her anything. What the gift that he's giving her as a benefit, which enacts the Kiddushin, is the fact that she owes years of service, and he's being meichel that. And once he says you don't have to work anymore, she becomes his wife. He says Ariad Mekudeshesli with that. She becomes his wife, and she doesn't have any halachas of servitude anymore. She's not a shivcha, she's not an amariya, she's a wife l'chol halachas. Now, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda has to be the one. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, the gift is something that she owns. It's her remaining servitude, and therefore she's being mekabelit. So the kesef kiddushin is her thing. It's going to her, and therefore she has to know about it. She has to have das to accept it. And even though a ketani usually doesn't have das, this is an exception to that rule. And the other opinion, which is not brought here, holds that the kesef kiddushin is retroactive to what the Adon gave the Amariya's father when he bought her. And that is a kesef kiddushin, and it takes place retroactively to then, and therefore the girl doesn't have to know about it, doesn't have to have anything in mind at all. The das is performed by the father. Now, the Gemara therefore says that's the answer to the question. That's why you have to have das here. That's the second halacha that we bring. Now, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak has a different understanding of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda holds that the kesef kiddushin is the original money. Why then does this fit into Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda when we say that you have to inform the girl? So he says, the Torah says, Ashalo Yada, she has to know. Yid means she has to be informed. Now, the Gemara quotes this Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda from the beginning. The Gemara is going to go more deeply into this now. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is discussing what point can you do Yid in an Amariya as a servitude. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says there has to be some service left. If it's 2 minutes before the end of her 6 years, there's no service left, and you can't do Yid. So the simple understanding of that is that there has to be a shava pruta worth that he's meichel to her. He has to be meichel to her service. Therefore, the kesef kiddushin is the mechila of her remaining service. If there's not enough time left that it's worth a shava pruta, then there's no kiddushin through that. Now, the other opinion would be that you don't have to have that, and we'll see that soon. Now, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak disagrees, and he says, no, you don't have to. The reason is not because the kesef kiddushin is the remaining years. The reason that you have to have some time left going to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is because the pasuk says v'hefta, and you learn from v'hefta that there has to be time remaining. It has to be a redemption of something. There's a connection between Yida and Vehefta. It's in the pasuk together. Yid can only be done when there's a redemption, when there's a Vehefta. Without that, you can't do Yid. Okay, the Gemara moves on now. The Gemara wants to say that there are two potential halachas we can learn out of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda's halacha, according to our understanding that it's the mechila of the kesef kiddushin. So first halacha, Rava says in Rav Nachman, he says that a man could tell his daughter, who's a ketana, I'm empowering you to be makabel your own kiddushin. Go be mekadosh yourself. Even though a ketana generally can't do that, but since there's an exception to that rule, and that she could be makabel her own kiddushin through yid, like Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, it's a mechila of her remaining years. Another exception could be is if her father tells her, I'm giving you the power to go be a makabel kiddushin for yourself. Now, another halacha, Rava says the name of Rav Nachman, is that somebody could be mekadesh a woman with a money that she owes him. That is, if he lent her, for example, and he took a mashkon from her, so she owes him money, and he's holding a mashkon. So even though has control of this that he's holding, still, if he forgoes the remaining money or the money that she owes him, that benefit could be kesef kiddushin. You see that from Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, because Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda holds that she can become mikudeshes by him being meichel her remaining years of service. That's a chayv. And even if he has a mashkon, and the mashkon is, of course, that he's holding on to her. The amariya is in his possession. All right, the Gemara now quotes the brisa of the machlekes Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda against the other opinion, the chachamim, and the brisa says as follows: how does yid work? So the first opinion here says that the Adain says to her, Harad Mekudeshesli, Harad Moresesli, and therefore she becomes his wife. And the rest says, even if it's at the end of the last day of the 6 years, even if it's just before Shkia, and then she becomes his wife for all halachos, and she doesn't do any avdus anymore. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says there has to be enough time in the day that the service that remains is worth a shava pruta, otherwise she's not mikudeshes. Okay, the machlok is the same way we said it before. Now the Brisa continues, and it says that this is a mashal, this is a parable to somebody who marries a woman ma'achshav la'achar shleshim yom. Here's kesef Kiddushin, should be chal later, retroactively from now. So when 30 days pass, it's going to be chal from today. Now, in those 30 days, someone else came and was mekadesh her. So she's married to the first one and not to the second one, because it takes place retroactively, and therefore the first one's Kiddushin really took hold retroactively before the second one did, so she's married to him. So the Gemara says, hold on a second, who's this marshal going like? It can't be Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda's Kiddushin is not retroactive. The Kiddushin is from now, the remaining years now. So what are we bringing a marshal to retroactivity? So it must be the Tanakama. The Tanakama says it's retroactive to the time that he bought her and he gave Kesef Kiddushin, he gave Kesef Kinyan to her father, that turns into Kesef Kiddushin, and they're married from then. So therefore that retroactive you see. So the Gemara says, so what's the marshal for? You're not adding anything. It's the same halacha. I know it's the same. The Gemara says, no, the Chiddush is that even though he didn't say me'achshav this time, he purchased her, there was no me'achshav. He didn't say that from now it should be chal kedushin. So you may think it can't be retroactive if he didn't say from now. And therefore, it's teaching me that it's as if he did. Gemara now brings another brisa that quotes this machlokes, similar, but in a sense inverted from the way we have it. So this brisa says if somebody sells his daughter into being an al-mavriya, and then he's mekadesh her to someone else. Now, the owner, the Adain, wants to do Yid, but she's already Mekudeshes. So what happens now? So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says she's Mekudeshes to the second person, and the owner can't do Yid. And this is because Rabbi Yehuda holds Yid only takes effect at that time. It's not retroactive. And by the time he wants to do Yid with the remaining years, the Mechila of those years, she's already Mekudesh to someone else, so he can't. The Chachamim say he could still do Yid, and that's because obviously it's retroactive. It's chal from the time of the Kesef Mechira, and therefore it predates the Kiddushin of the second person. Now the Brisa continues and says this is a mashal, somebody who gives Kiddushin to a woman and says you are Mekudeshes to me after 30 days. Someone else comes as Mekadesh in between. That person is chal the Kiddushin, and the first one, since he delayed its chalais till after 30 days, it's too late and it's not chal at all. So again, the Gemara asks, who is this a mashal to? If it's to the Rabbanan, who is the latter opinion, that doesn't make sense because they said that it's retroactive. So here you give me an example where it's not retroactive. So it must be Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda, but if it's Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda, what's the chiddush? You can't do it now. You don't need a mashal for that. You can't be mekadesh someone who's mekadesh to someone else. The says, no, the chiddush is that in the case of Yid, he didn't specify it should take effect after 30 days. So you may think he wants it to be chal retroactively, as opposed to the case of the mashal where he specified that it's after 30 days. Therefore, you tell me that it's a mashal, he doesn't have to say 30 days, that's how it works anyway. Umar now quotes another brisa that's related, this time it's not Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda. So this brisa says, what happens if somebody sells his daughter as an amavriya and he specifies that it's on condition that they don't do yid, which is against what the Torah said, that the Odain has a right to do yid. So Rabbi Meir says it's chal, it's a valid t'nai, and the Odain can't do yid, otherwise the sale is cancelled. Chachamim say you're not allowed to make a t'nai against the Torah halacha, and therefore the t'nai is invalid, and he's allowed to do yid. So when I ask you, tell me that Rabbi Meir holds that you're allowed to make a t'nai against the halacha, and we have a brisa where he says not that way. And the Gemara quotes that brisa, also machlokes, this time it's from Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. This is talking about where somebody is mekadesh an isha al t'nai, that he doesn't have to give her sher ksus v'ayna, the three obligations of food, clothing, and marital relations. So those are the rice obligations. He makes a t'nai, he says, I'm not going to do that. Rabbi Meir says it's an invalid t'nai, the Kiddushin is chal, and the t'nai is void, and he has to keep those three halachas. The implication is because it's a t'nai against the halacha. Rabbi Yehuda partially disagrees. He says when it comes to the monetary obligations he owes her, which is share and ksus, she has a right to be meichel. Anybody could be meichel a monetary account receivable. But Aina, which is a body painful experience, she can't be Michael that. And therefore that he has to do. So again, the kasha is, how come Rabbi Meir here, he can't violate the halacha with his tanai, and before he can. So Chizkiah explains here is different because you have clear because it says he could do that, because it says la'ama, seller as an amma, chiyimko ish is bitei la'ama. Sometimes she's just an amma. She does not get the halachos of a wife of Sherksus and Aina. That would be if he makes conditions. So here he specifically allows that, and that's why that's okay. So the Gemara asks, what are the Rabbanan going to do with this drasha of la'ama, that they don't use it for that? So the Gemara explains that that's used for a different drasha, that he's allowed to sell her to psulim. That's what we'd seen. When there's a discussion as to whether a man can sell his daughter to someone who can't do yid al pi halacha. So the three levels of that would be someone that she's mutter to marry, someone that it's a law for her to marry, so Kiddushin is taifis, but he's not supposed to, or someone that is kares to marry, so there's no tzviz Kiddushin at all. So the Rabbanan here learn that the middle level, someone who's puzzled, so there's a law for her to marry, yid is technically viable, it's possible, it would be chal, and therefore he's allowed to sell her to a situation like that. But that's why you have to have la'ama, because in a case like that, she'd only be sold as an amma, she can never actually become a wife, she can never do yid, because it would be usher. Now, so Gemara asks, why do you need to teach me that she can be sold to someone like that? It's a kavach chaimer, because the father can sell her to psulim. The father could be mekadesh her to psulim, and there's tefisas kiddushin to psulim that he's mekadesh her to. So certainly he should be allowed to sell her to. So the Gemara says that's not a valid kal v'chaimer, because the ability of kiddushin is sometimes stronger than the ability of mechira. You see, the father can be mekadesh's daughter when she's a nara, but he can only sell her when she's a katana, not when she's a nara any longer. Now, the Gemara therefore says, that's why you need the pasuk to teach me this. Now, the next opinion here is Rabbi Eliezer, who says you don't need a pasuk to teach me that he's allowed to sell her to psulin, because it says, Imra be'eni adinea. What does Ra mean? Ra means he doesn't want to marry her. Ra means that, not that he doesn't want to, but that it's a bad situation to marry her because she's usher to him. So what then is la'ama for? That's to teach that he could even sell her to someone who there is an iser kares for him to marry, and that there's no tefisas kedushin and marriage is impossible, meaning you don't have to have the ability to do yid. You could sell it to someone even if yid is impossible at any time. Now, what does Rabbi Meir hold? Since he doesn't have this pasuk of la'ama, he uses it, as we saw before, for something else. So the Gemara says, if you're talking about selling to psulim, he holds like Rabbi Eliezer. You have imra be'eni adinel. That's what teaches me that. As far as selling to kroivim, where there's an iser kares, he holds that is usher. You're not allowed to do that, so he doesn't need a bakar for that. The Gemara ends off the sugya by quoting two baraisas that speak about specifically what type of kroivim, which kroivim one is not allowed to sell to. So the first brisa says, interestingly, that you're allowed to sell your